Mute yourself. That would be very helpful. Enable all of us to hear a little bit better. We will be both recording tonight's hearing as well as streaming it on the Diocesan YouTube channel. Give us just a minute and we'll get started. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Andrew Walter, and I serve the diocese as Canon to the Ordinary and Chief Operating Officer. Welcome to the first of two resolution hearings that we are holding in preparation for Diocesan Convention at the end of the month. As I said when we first let you in from the waiting room, please keep yourself muted at all times unless called upon to speak, as that will help the audio for all of us. The purpose of this hearing is to provide all of you with an opportunity to hear very briefly from the resolution sponsors and to share any comments or questions you may have about the resolutions. We will not be debating the resolutions tonight because that is for Diocesan Convention, and therefore we will limit the question and answer time this evening. My role as the moderator is to try and give everyone who wants to speak the chance to do so. Along the way, if there is a question that I feel can be answered pretty quickly, I may call on the sponsor to respond. But otherwise, the resolution sponsors and members of the resolution committee will be taking notes tonight as they listen to what you have to say. And then based upon your feedback, the resolutions may be tweaked or edited prior to convention. In just a moment, I'll ground ourselves in prayer, and then we will have 30 minutes for each resolution.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Please keep yourselves muted. As I was saying, we'll have about 30 minutes for each resolution, taking about a 5 to 10 minute break in between. When we begin each 30 minutes, we will hear from the resolution sponsor, give them a chance to say a few opening words for no more than 3 minutes. And then the floor will be open for all of you. If you have a question or a comment, please type it into the chat and I will call on you in order. I'd also ask if you hear a question or a comment that really resonates with you, something that you agree with, if you could click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You may have to click on the reactions button first, but if you could click the raise hand button, that gives us a sense that what you're hearing you might agree with or you resonates with you, and that's helpful information for the resolutions committee and the resolution sponsors. I think that's about it in the ways of my introduction. Are there any questions before I say a prayer and we get started? Okay, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in the Episcopal Diocese of Washington for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Okay, first resolution for this evening is on confronting Christian Zionism. And I'm going to turn it over to the resolution sponsor, Sari Atik from St. John's, Norwood. Sari.
Thank you, Andrew. Friends, I have 3 minutes and I probably won't share that much because my assumption is that everyone here has had a chance to read the resolution that I'm sponsoring. And I just want to say thank you. I know it's a lot of reading to do and to kind of, formulate your own thoughts on this. So my comments are brief. I just want to just reiterate something that we all know is that our theology isn't just something that is between us and God. But if theology matters to us, it's something that affects and impacts the way we live, and it shapes the way we think about the world. And Christian Zionism is a theology that, as a Palestinian Christian, I grew up seeing very much the impact of it around me. As I went to seminary and studied more about the origins of Christian Zionism, I realized that most people who support the state of Israel, believing that that's what God calls them to do, the actual state today, the modern state of Israel, might not be aware that such a theology is something that only developed in the 1800s. And so this resolution is intended to do two things. One is to educate our diocese on kind of the origins of this kind of thinking. And also it's intended to allow us as a diocese to be clear that we not only understand what Christian Zionism is, but we also recognize the impact that it has on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict today, and that we are asking the diocese to take a stand and to invite the General Convention to consider this, that we need to be condemning these kinds of harmful theologies that don't bring greater life and liberation, but actually perpetuate oppression and don't serve really anyone at the end of the day. So those are my brief remarks, and I really look forward to your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sari. Okay, we're going to open up the floor. If you've got a question or a comment, please type it into the chat. And as I said, I'll call on you in order. We do have the ability to share the resolution on the screen tonight, if that would be helpful as you share your question or comment. Okay, people, now come on. We're not going to have any questions or comments or debate at convention. Don't be shy. Okay, thank you. I'm going to call on Abbott, who's asked a question in the chat. Abbott, do you want to voice your question? Please unmute yourself.
Just a general question, not an argumentative question, but is there anyone that we're aware of today in the U.S. Episcopal Church that is embracing dispensationalism? Neutral question.
And Sari, I am going to allow you to answer because we haven't had that many other questions or comments yet. So if you want to respond, please do.
So Christian Zionism for sure, because it's really pervasive. And you tend to find it in maybe more evangelical Episcopal churches. Dispensationalism is it's a very systematic way of thinking, and I think that most people who tend to support the state of Israel as Christians from a theological standpoint, they might not be able to, to like explain what dispensationalism is. But one thing that dispensationalism really is clear on is a different kind of standard or future for Christians and for Jews. So there's a different promise. God has a different plan for the Jewish people than God does for the Christian people. And that's something that you definitely, that's very much a central piece of dispensationalism. And I think the effects of that, and people would probably be able to articulate that. So, and yes, in the Episcopal Church, definitely, but how broadly, I'm not really sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Someone asked if we could share the resolution on the screen. Just as a reminder, the resolutions, Kim knows they just want to have it up the whole time, and I'm going to say that we're not going to share it unless there's a specific line you want to refer to in your question or comment. Kim is very quick on the trigger there, on the buttons. But a reminder that the text of the resolutions and explanations are available on the EDAW website, so you can always look at them there. If you do have a specific question or comment about a line in the resolution, we're happy to share it at that time. Otherwise, it's nice to be able to see everyone's faces. Clara has a question. Clara, would you like to unmute yourself and share your question?
Yes, thank you. It follows the previous question, actually. I was wondering, within our own diocese, do we know how many congregations have discussed or maybe read about Christian Zionism or tried to understand what it is about and how it impacts our behavior as church communities?
Sarah, any thoughts?
Clara, I don't know. I definitely in the past at diocesan convention, resolutions have come forward related to Israel-Palestine. And from some of the comments, one would assume that there are pro-Israeli sentiment within our diocese, and that's okay. This is not a pro-Israel or pro-Palestine thing that we're doing here. It's more addressing the theology. So that's the only answer I can give you. Has it been discussed? I have no idea. And maybe I would ask attendees here if it has ever been discussed in their parishes, and maybe that would give us a sense.
Yes, if you've discussed this at your parish, if you would type that into the chat so that we could get a sense of how many parishes have discussed this topic, that would be great. Also, if you look in the chat, Emma has posted a link to the resolutions. Thank you, Emma. That's very helpful. Anton has a question as to whether this resolution or one like this has been presented at past general conventions. If so, do we know how that resolution was received? Any thoughts, Sari?
Andrew, could you repeat the question? I was looking for it.
Yeah, the question is, has this resolution been presented at past general conventions?
Not to my knowledge. And again, you know, there's always gaps in my knowledge, but to my knowledge, no.
Thank you. Mary Nesnek has a comment. Mary, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, as a graduate student, I attended prayer meetings that were sponsored by Christian Zionist groups. And I learned, because I had a grant through the Middle East Institute, that these groups funnel large amounts of money to build illegal settlements in the West Bank, which is still area that is contested. And what there is a conflation of the image of the modern state of Israel with the idea that there would be a second coming of Christ and that there would be a final battle between good and evil. So it's a mixture of both reading specific parts of the Schofield Bible, which I believe talks about dispensationalism. I'm not a theologian. My area is actually trauma and children, but I also learned that specific pages in the Bible that are read that refer to the modern state of Israel cause people to speak in tongues, but it also is a way of harnessing that population to support specific policies that may be against international law. So it's a conflation of religion with a very serious public affairs and economic stream of support. And they're very closely tied with the public affairs efforts of the Israeli embassy here in Washington. And certainly there are many groups that go over and see a very defined image of Israel that purports to represent the beliefs in their parts of the Bible that are read. So it's a conflation of both religious texts and public affairs. And I have attended meetings in San Antonio and services that are run by a group called Christians United for Israel. And they're one of the largest lobbies on behalf of Israel in the United States. And they say that their Bible speaks to an ironclad relationship that cannot be broken based on the reading of these texts, which is the basis of Christian Zionism. So it translates into a public affairs voice that supports a particular policy of a particular international entity, i.e. Israel. And certainly people like Bishop Tutu have spoken about the importance of separating things out and looking at conditions of human rights for everyone there, and that supremacy is not a way to run a country. But Christian Zionists, from the work that I have done, seem to favor one group over another, and it's based on their reading of religious texts in the Old Testament mainly.
Thank you, Mary. Thelma has a question. Thelma, please unmute yourself.
Yes, and I apologize. I just have read the resolution. My question was, what do you think would be the reaction of the American Jewish community to this resolution? I mean, how controversial, in other words, how controversial will this be for the church to adopt this?
Sari, would you like to respond?
I think the next two resolutions will be more controversial than this one. I think this one, just kind of going back to what Mary was saying, Israel has not, like, those who understand what Christian Zionists believe, who are Jews in Israel, they say things like, well, we're glad to have their money, but we just hope that what they believe will happen to all the Jews at the end times won't come true, because it's not really beneficial to the Jewish people either. And so will the Jewish community, maybe they might react to the word Zionism, that might itself draw some attention, but Christian Zionism and dispensationalism, all this stuff, anyone who digs deep might find it really interesting and might learn from it, as opposed to actually feeling like they themselves are committed to dispensationalism and Christian Zionism. So I don't know if that was clear or not, but
thank you, Sari. Michelle Glidden has a question about some of the language in the resolution.
Yeah, and I will start by saying this is out of ignorance of the issue. But as I read the resolution, it says reject the theology of Christian Zionism as a modern misinterpretation of Scripture. And so are you rejecting it as a modern misinterpretation, or are you rejecting it because you think it is a modern misinterpretation? And I could imagine that the language that is currently in the resolution might cause the confusion for those of us who don't know the core element. So you don't need to respond to that now, but you and the authors might just look at that language and be sure that it's 100% clearly stating what you want it to state.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Andrew, do you see all those hands that are raised?
Yes, I think that was, those hands were raised, I believe, in response to the comment or the question from, I think it was from Thelma. If you have your hand raised and want to ask a question or make a comment, if you would type into the chat, that would be great. Michelle, do you want to speak to your comment? Michelle Morgan?
Sure, just Michelle Morgan, St. Mark's, Capitol Hill. I just want to say that I'm not trying to be offensive, but when we make a question about all Jewish people and what all Jewish people might believe, that would be like saying all Christians. And I just think we need to be careful. I know lots of Jewish folks who have issues with what's happening in the Holy Land as well. So just to sort of give us some frame of the conversation, and done with great respect and love. So thank you.
I couldn't agree with that more, Michelle, and I appreciate that. And especially even if there was any critique of anything that I said, I take that with total humility because I believe what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Anton. If you look in the chat, Anton has posted a link to a collateral reference from the Diocese of Chicago and a resolution they passed at their 2020 convention. Thank you, Anton. Joymel, you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, just to be sure, because in the resolution there is specifically a call to present is approved to the 80th General Convention, and I'm not sure that we have time enough to do that. So just in case we can present it to, I don't know how to deal with that, but.
Yes, no, that's a great question. The Resolutions Committee did raise this question as well, and I know the sponsors checked, and there is still time to submit resolutions to General Convention. Diana, I see you've posted a question or a comment. Invite you to unmute yourself.
Yeah, my concern is I follow Christian Zionism for years and years, but then there's recently been greater concern in our country about the treatment of Palestinians by the Israeli government. And I also see it in news stories and hear through personal family stories that there's grows to be a connection between this fear and this concern and anti-Semitism in our country. So my concern is, how do we separate out those two and be clear that we're saying one thing and not the other in this resolution?
Thank you. And thank you, Tom, for posting a good resource for understanding and discussing Christian Zionism in the chat. Thank you for that, Tom. Charles, thanks for your comment. Would you like to give voice to what you said in the chat?
Well, frankly, I learned a lot from reading these today, and I was clueless on how extensive some of this is, and I was relating it to our congregation, friends that I know, and all the other things that we're dealing with in this country that has to do basically with racism. I'm just impressed that this is coming up, and I think it's a worthwhile effort. And my question, which I just put in, is what are the realistic next steps, particularly with the other dioceses and the mother organization? And how do we cause more things to happen to get at this, especially given the other two resolutions we've got to talk about? I'd be interested in what the expectations are and who does what, when, and how.
Well, if this resolution is passed at diocesan convention, it, as the resolution says, it would be passed on to general convention for debate and vote at general convention. Charles, I think you're muted. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm talking about actual results, not passing the resolution on and everybody agreeing to it or not agreeing to it. I agree to the resolution, but knowing what the expectation is and who will do what to cause some change is a bigger question in my mind.
Thank you.
I didn't realize you muted immediately after the last comment.
That's, yep, thank you. And thank you to Joy Mel for his comment in the chat, encouraging us to avoid the use of the phrase National Episcopal Church, because the Episcopal Church is not just a national church, it's an international church and includes dioceses in Latin America and other countries. So thank you, Joy Mel, you're absolutely right.
Andrew, may I offer a final remark, maybe?
Sure, I don't want to rush this. We have a few more minutes if there are further questions or comments. Okay, so seeing none. Yes, Sari, please, any sort of, just last remarks you'd like to make, having heard from folks?
So first, I just want to, again, just say thank you, everyone. I can see not only how thoughtful the questions and comments have been, but also I could see, the wheels turning in your faces as I look at the screen. I did want to say that I think it's really exciting when a diocese takes big steps to stand for truth, recognizing that it might ruffle feathers. And I was mindful as I was kind of sitting here that if the prophets in the scriptures were concerned about pleasing everyone, they wouldn't have said the things that they said. And we have to be committed. And I say this in particular, I have to leave now because I'm committed to another training I need to go to at 6:30. But I'm saying this in advance of the next two resolutions, that our job is to speak the truth. And in doing that, we trust that the chips will fall where they fall. We have to do it in love, of course. But let's definitely not let the standard be who are we offending and not offending. Because the truth is what we need to be committed to. So I just want to say again, thank you, Andrew, for just giving me this a few moments to share these thoughts. So God bless, guys. I'll see you at convention.
Thank you, Sari. Thank you, everyone. I see that it's 6:27. We're going to take just a quick 5-minute break. We will reconvene at around 6:32 to discuss the next resolution. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to reconvene us. Welcome back. We are going to move on to the resolution on opposing Israel's apartheid. And I'm going to ask my colleague Kim Vaughn to take a moment to share the resolution on the screen, just so you all can have a chance to read it through again. She has also posted a link to the resolution in the chat. And I do encourage you to open that link up, as we will take this down in a moment so we can see each other as we talk. Kim, I think you could scroll down a little bit so that we could see more of the text of the resolution. There we go. That's great. Thank you, Kim. I think you could take that down now. Again, if please try to open the resolution up on another device if you can, using the link in the chat. And at this point, I would like to call on the resolution sponsor, Tom Getman from St. Mark's, DC. Tom. Tom, it looks like you're muted or we can't hear you.
There, is that better?
That's much better.
I
Thank
turned
you.
it off and then it got
There
turned
you
back
go.
on. Thank you, Andrew, for creating such a nice atmosphere, creative thinking atmosphere, and Sari and Absentia for setting the stage for more difficult discussions. And I want to say that as a person who has lived with this issue for 40 years, since Desmond Tutu walked into the Senate office where I was working, I really do believe that it was part of a long trail of preparation for us to do these kinds of discussions. He invited first the senator and we staff people for an understanding of apartheid on the ground. And after 20 years of going back and forth, at the last beach liberation, the integration of the last white beach in Cape Town, students waded in the water and took the signs down and sang Wade in the Water. And then Desmond Tutu thanked those of us that came from the United States for the legislation that had been passed to outlaw apartheid and put sanctions on apartheid. And then he said to me, if I really wanted to prove my bona fides in terms of human rights, I should turn my eyes to the Palestinians. And I learned early on, you didn't argue with Desmond Tutu, you just listened to the spirit through his heart and through his lips. And as a result, my wife and I ended up 5 years in Jerusalem. And then we got to host Desmond when he came to promote the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to Palestinians and Israelis. And I learned very early on that he had love for both peoples and wanted to really build bridges so that the children of God could come to more fruitful conclusions than have been the case. And when the Israeli government representative said no to the offer of putting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in place, Archbishop Desmond was heartbroken. And he said, we will never forgive. He said that he heard the Israelis say, we will never forgive the Arabs for what they've done to us. And he was then famously quoted to say, the situation of dehumanization reminds me of what happened to us Black people in South Africa. Well, I work closely with government people and even security people in Israel. And two of the prime ministers I worked with said, our problem here is we have an apartheid regime, and we've got to get to the bottom of it, or it's going to be a bloodbath. And after 40 years now of working on this issue and encouraging government and church and humanitarian efforts, I witnessed too many deaths and too many excessive deployment of heavy military force against civilians, and the destruction of homes and schools and medical clinics and gardens that we humanitarians and churches, included in that number of humanitarians, helped to pay for. So amazingly, Arch Tutu was intent never to condemn, but to remind differences are not meant to separate or alienate with walls and politics, but rather for us to know how much all God's children need to find each other to make peace. And so I cannot keep quiet. And it's my view that neither can we keep quiet. And we need to build partnerships with the human rights organizations and the progressive people within the Israeli government and the suffering people on the ground in Gaza and the West Bank, so that in fact, the results of this, or the possibility of the results of this resolution, could begin to take hold and answer Mr. Day's question about what are the expectations. I think the expectations for us has to be that we Christians reject the systemic apartheid colonial racism that still exists in places like, even some tail of it in South Africa, but mostly in the Middle East now. And so we, with humility and real commitment, want to put this before you for discussion and before the convention, the diocesan convention, so that we can link arms with people who want to do the action of being followers of Jesus in times like this, for the sake of all God's people in the Middle East. And so I offer that to you as the cry of my heart, and I'm very happy to answer any hard questions you may have about how we move forward on this. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. Floor is open for questions or comments. Please type into the chat.
I'm used to hard questions and sometimes even more heated ones. So have at it, friends. I'm happy to be available to you in this regard.
I'm not seeing any questions or comments yet. Kim, why don't you put the resolution back up? If you could, share it on the screen. Give everyone a chance to read it through again. Thank you.
If you would like, I could put it into maybe straightforward language about what the assertions are that we're asking for.
Tom, let's just let everyone read it and see if people have questions or comments.
Thank you.
Pamela, I see you have a question. Would you like to unmute yourself and share that with everyone?
Well, thank you. Pam Brewer of St. Anne's, Damascus. So say we pass this, we condemn it. What then? I mean, it's just words. I mean, we've done this before, and I don't know, have we let the president know of any things we've done in the past? What next?
That's a very good question. Do you want me to have at it, Andrew, or wait for others to comment?
No, please go ahead. And I see someone else click the raised hand button to agree with that. So thank you for that. But Tom, please go ahead and respond until we have other questions or comments in the chat.
Thank you, Pam, very much for that question. I was hoping someone would ask it. We have to make our faith an active faith. We have to do what is right to do on behalf of the people who are marginalized. That's really part of the whole gospel, that we do what it says in Luke 4 and Matthew 25, to care for those who suffer and who may be blind, maybe if not blind physically, spiritually or emotionally. And I have had so many of my Jewish friends and even people who work for Shin Bet and for the military. We need help to be rescued from this situation. Military force is not working to bring healing. In fact, it's too bad that they didn't early on embrace Desmond Tutu's request to have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So really what I think what has to happen is that in rejecting the systemic colonial racism, we would then encourage our government to enact key legislation to withhold or restrict military funding and apply sanctions to Israel until the occupation is eliminated. And I've had people at the UN, people in the government in Israel, people in the government in this country say to me, please help us get this done. We have to have bridges built between the two warring sides, like those rope bridges that are built every year in the Latin American countries, where people on both sides of the Gulf have to work together and web it together, weave it together on each side. So those are two of the things that I think we can do. And we can identify illegal laws like the nation state law, that is like Jim Crow laws in Israel, that takes rights away from Arab Israelis. They can't vote anymore. They don't have as many human rights as they had a year ago. So those are places we can be of help. And there are people like Desmond Tutu, including Sari's dad, Naeem Atik, that are rising up to give instruction in that regard. So we can join in as churches and as denominations and
Thank you,
as
Tom. Thank you.
God's people.
We do have a few more questions coming in. Jim Quigley has a question, I think, that relates to all three resolutions we're discussing tonight. Jim, would you like to ask the question now? Would you like to wait until we get on to the third resolution?
Andrew, I was just starting to write it in the chat to kind of gather my thoughts.
Okay.
So I'm gonna keep doing that and then chime in when I'm ready.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Mary has a question. Mary, would you please unmute yourself?
Yes, I understand that Beit Salem, which is an Israeli human rights organization, was one of the first to use that term apartheid to describe the structures. And then Human Rights Watch, a US-based human rights group, also defined it as such. And I know that the person who wrote it was then deported and is no longer allowed to work for Human Rights Watch. His name is Omar Shakir. He's an American citizen. He's a graduate of Stanford University Law School and is now back in New York. But are there legal strictures that follow at a definition of an entity that is defined as apartheid with respect to, say, trade laws in the District of Columbia, or groups that participate in economic relations with a country that's defined as apartheid, such as South Africa was a long time ago? But is there an economic or legal ramification for the use of that term regarding another state? That's kind of my question.
Thank you.
The International Court has declared apartheid laws illegal and have pressed the case in several events. And they are being carried forward right now. One very important one that Jim Zugby talked about just today was the laws of equal access through borders. And Israel would like to have the privilege of coming in without having to have a visa. And so our State Department is being asked to say, well, if Israelis are going to be allowed in through our borders without visas, then we would require that to be the case for all Americans too, including Palestinian Americans. So there are at least half a dozen or more issues like that, yes, Mary, we can pursue legally that would help open the door to open discussion about this situation and maybe some progress. So thanks for asking the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Michelle, thank you for your comment in the chat. Would you like to say anything further? Michelle Morgan?
Yeah, I think this. I think that this is an attempt to the start of a deeper conversation. I think that being the age that I am, one of my first political actions was to ask my college to stop dealing with South Africa around the issue of apartheid. And I think that solidified in me a very clear picture of what was happening. And I think for us to name this with this powerful word and ask us to live into it is the power of naming. And I also say that we bring more love, more light, more God into the world in our actions and as called people. It will always be difficult to continue to preach love. And I think this is a loving resolution to say we love the people and we want to move forward with it. When we narrow our view and say we have a God that is just so and so small, we get rewarded for it. And I think it's scary to say yes to this and to live into the ramifications of it. But I do honestly believe it's what we're called to. And I learned that from Gene Robinson when he talked about moving forward and being expansive and seeing all of us as children of God. And I think that's what this resolution is trying to get at. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Pastor.
Jessica, I think you have a concern that applies to all three resolutions that we're discussing tonight. Would you like to say something for us?
Well, I just have some desire to give some parishioners a heads up, and I'm imagining my beloved next door neighbor reading about this in the Washington Post and being like, Jessica, what's going on? And I'm like, I can't deal, like, I just don't have the language or any of those things to deal with that. So I was wondering what sort of resources, because this is an intense subject. And so I'm wondering what sort of resources are going to be made available to us.
My suggestion is that St. Luke's do what other churches in the diocese have done and have some courses on this issue and on Christian Zionism and on boycott and divestment.
Well, but I need it to be done before the end of the month. Like I have to give people a heads up before convention. So it's a quite quick turnaround.
Well, I'd be happy to come and have a chat with your church. And I'm sure there are others in the circle that would be happy to do it too. But this is a long range thing. This is something that Michelle Morgan was talking about in terms of long time educational process that we commit ourselves to over time. And like Sari said, there are going to be some feathers ruffled because people won't understand it completely. But the Washington Post and the New York Times are two media organs that are being very, very responsive about giving different voices opportunity to speak to these issues right now. So we can give you information that will help set the stage for the debate.
Thank you, Tom. And I see that Diana concurred with what Jessica was saying. So thank you, Diana. Charles Day, I see you had a comment and a question. Would you like to share with the group?
I was relating back to what Tom said about South Africa. And as I recall, that it took the United Nations to get involved to set the policies, and even had to use economic and military relations as part of the solution. Do you see this going that direction, or what's your estimate of the course of action?
Mr. Day, it already has. We've been debating this in the UN. I was a representative at the UN for 9 years. And I feel like there too, there is progress being made so that military, we're already involved militarily. So the way to be involved militarily is to be less involved militarily. And that's one of the things that the UN has suggested and has even offered for peacekeepers. So I think you're also alert to something that is necessary, and without you knowing it, has made some progress. It's moving forward, and the debates are quite energized in the Human Rights Council and in the General Assembly.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I've put my email, for those that need immediate information, I put my email in the chat for Jessica and others that would like some information.
Thank you, Tom. Kim, if you would take down the resolution just so I can look at the screens here. The floor is still open for questions or comments, so please type into the chat. So Jane has a question. She's a new delegate, and she's wondering if this or a similar resolution has been considered by convention in the past. Tom, do you know?
This is my first year as a delegate, so I can't tell you the specifics, but yes, there have been discussions about the general field of play, but I'm not sure how specific on apartheid specifically it's been discussed.
Thank you.
I'm sure the archivist can tell us. I think somebody's looking it up right now. I have a friend who's good at that sort of thing, and she might be checking back to see what has been presented in the past.
Any last questions or comments for Tom? Right, and Kim just posted a link to our diocesan journals, which are published every year and include actions at convention, including resolutions that were passed. Thank you, Kim. I am not seeing any further questions or comments. So Tom, I would invite you just to speak for a minute or so if you want to reflect on what you've heard tonight.
I would encourage you, friends, to embrace this as a call from the prophets of our church and Jesus himself in regards to caring for the marginalized, the poor, the oppressed. Whenever we see the taking away of people's humanity, then we have to figure out how we move forward. Martin Marty, the great church historian, was visiting in Jerusalem in the first couple of months I was there, and he talked about the Jungian triangle, about people who are very angry because of things that have happened to them. And Jewish people have a real reason to be angry. And then he said, on the other side of the triangle is fear that it's going to happen again. And there is fear out there that terrible things can happen to our brothers and sisters who are Jews. But if anger and fear are not dealt with, then it becomes xenophobia, and people are made to be scapegoats. And I think one of our big responsibilities as followers of Jesus is to make sure that people's deepest hurts like that are addressed. And so that's one of the things we must do when we give good information about how to deal with this. And one of the best ways to do it is to go to the J Street and the Jewish Voice for Peace conferences, where they address this very directly. And they feel just like we do, that this issue of apartheid must be addressed if we're going to do that. So I would challenge us to engage fully and without fear, and with an opportunity to be healers in a very broken situation. Thanks so much for this opportunity to share with you tonight.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone. We're going to take another break now. We will start again at 7:05 to talk about the third resolution.
Um,
It is just about 7:05, and so I invite all of you to return. We will now focus on our third and last resolution for this evening, which is the resolution on defending the right to boycott. My colleague Kim has posted a link to the resolution in the chat. And Kim, if you would also share the text of the resolution on the screen. That would be great. Thank you. And at this point, I invite the resolution's lead sponsor, David Waycaster from Good Shepherd in Silver Spring, to say a few words. David.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this. In 2005, the Palestinian Civil Society issued a call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And this was envisioned as a nonviolent movement patterned on efforts used to convince the South African government to end apartheid. In its broadest form, this effort supports boycotts of and divestment from Israeli businesses and from businesses substantially involved with Israel. The effort is aimed to convince the secular government of Israel that complying with international law, respecting human rights, and ending the illegal occupation of Palestinian land is in its economic best interest. Boycotts are an important form of expression protected by the First Amendment, and they have a long and storied history in the United States, going all the way back to the pre-revolutionary boycott of tea, as well as the boycott of South Africa during apartheid, which was a boycott the Episcopal Church strongly supported. Over the past several years, there have been over 100 measures introduced in state and local legislatures and in the US Congress to punish boycott supporters, including those who merely refuse to pledge never to boycott Israel. To date, more than 30 states have enacted anti-BDS measures. The American Civil Liberties Union and other civil liberties groups have actively opposed anti-BDS legislation as an infringement on the constitutional right to boycott and as antithetical to the principles of free speech. This resolution asks the General Convention of the Episcopal Church to use its voice in defense of the First Amendment right to speak and act nonviolently in accordance with one's conscience. And as such, this resolution is in line with our baptismal covenant to promise to strive for justice and peace among all people. And I appreciate everyone being here tonight to talk about the resolution, and I'm happy to answer any questions and listen to comments. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, David. Okay, questions or comments, please type them into the chat. Yes, I see a question from Abbott. Abbott, I invite you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think we would all agree there are some serious First Amendment issues in regard to trying to, for states to outlaw boycotts because they are political speech. So are you aware of any successful prosecutions under any of these 30 state laws?
Thank you for your question. I am not aware. What usually happens is that the law is cited and people tend to back down before it gets to actually being persecuted. So to my knowledge, the constitutionality of these laws has yet been tested. And they're really designed to create a climate of fear and intimidation more than they are currently designed to actually be enforceable.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Abbott. Pamela, thank you for your question. Would you like to share that with the group? Please unmute yourself.
Okay, again, very simple research skills. I see that Maryland has an anti-BDS law. What actions would you want to see the Episcopal Church do if this resolution passes? Are we to go and work with our reps and change the law in Maryland or in Washington, or?
Yes, actually, that is exactly what I'd like to see. This resolution actually conveys the language to General Convention and addresses the Congress of the United States. So if General Convention were to pass this resolution, then the Episcopal Church would be able to tell our congressional representatives that we oppose any sort of resolution, any sort of anti-BDS legislation on the national level. But it also would give people at the local level and the state level the ability to point to it to say the Episcopal Church is on record as opposing this law, and then would enable us to go to Annapolis and to lobby on behalf of getting the law changed.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Pamela. Mary, would you like to unmute yourself, please? Share your comment.
Yeah, I think that the local level efforts to create state laws have been worked on for a number of years. And so there was one case in Texas where a man was asked to sign this and refused to, and the state courts found that the law was really unconstitutional for all of these reasons, that it really hampers First Amendment, and that it is a nonviolent way of exercising a voice against a system that violates human rights. So in the state of Texas, part of the BDS law that was enacted was found unconstitutional. I don't have the reference for that, but I can find it because I have a colleague in Texas who told me about it.
Thank you. Anne, you have trouble with a little bit of the language in the resolution. Would you please unmute yourself and say a little bit more?
Yes, thank you. It's not just in the resolution, it's also in the explanation as well as in the conversation. We seem to be slipping between, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We seem to be slipping between BDS and boycott as if they are synonymous. And I find it very difficult to follow. The resolution itself speaks about calling on POTUS and Congress to oppose legislation penalizing or criminalizing support for nonviolent boycotts, but we're not talking about divestment, obviously not talking about sanctions either. And at the very end of the explanation, it says, whatever one's stance on BDS, we view boycotts as an important tool and support it in our baptismal covenant. I'd like to see the language tightened up. Let's be very clear that we want, protection for the right to boycott as well as to divest. If that's what your intent is, let's be clear. That's all.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate that. Andrew, I think Pamela might have had another question or comment.
Oh,
okay. No,
I see her shaking her head.
Sorry.
Also, I remember Jim Quigley maybe had a question related to all three, and Jim, no pressure, but if you've been able to formulate your question, be happy to take that at any time.
Andrew, I'm just about done.
Okay.
I'm going to just hit send.
Perfect. And I want to point out that what Emma has posted in the chat, she's done some keyword searches through EDAO convention journals, and she shared some of the information that has come up. So thank you so much for that, Emma. And so, yeah, Jim, thank you. So would you like to say a little bit more to say some more to the group?
I can, I guess. I try to be careful in situations like this. All I can see in front, I can't see anyone's faces. All I can see is the resolution on the screen. But
Kim, could you stop sharing the screen for a minute then?
I guess this is somewhat along reflecting on some of the work that we've done at St. Albans on the Sacred Ground curriculum and how much the 30 or 40 members that have gone through that have learned about our own history in the United States in regard to racism, in relation to the so many resolutions that have been passed at the General Convention regarding racism. And as someone who's really thinking about these issues, and I hope this is clear in the comment, I wonder if making a commitment for all congregations to think about these issues, I don't even know how that would happen or how it might work, but I wonder if that could be as valuable as passing a resolution or resolutions on issues that are so incredibly complex rather than learning about them. That's as much as I can kind of spit out now, but that's what I felt called to say. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jim. Eugene, thank you. Invite you to unmute yourself.
Yes. My point is basically a comment. The comment is this. Let's assume this resolution passes. Who does the boycott affect? And how do we put it into effect? Is it against the government? And if it's against the government, how does that benefit the people? I can give an example of what happened several years ago when Southern Rhodesia was boycotted. The blacks suffered because what Ian Smith and the others did was the bicycles that the blacks were riding, they took them over. So now the blacks were working instead of riding their bicycles. All the whites were riding bicycles. And I don't know how effective the boycott would be, because what happens to individuals that have businesses that are dealing with the people, but they are from our government. I mean, they're not from our government, they're just private contractors or private business people. And you boycott them, what happens to all the people that they hire in here that were working before? I just would like to know who benefits from a boycott.
Thank you, Eugene. David, would you like to
So
respond?
I would, and Eugene, thank you. That's a good question. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things that always needs to be considered are what are the unintended consequences of any action we take. In this instance, this resolution is really about this resolution is not advocating a boycott per se. This resolution is saying that anyone who chooses to organize a boycott should not be punished or discriminated against by governments, either federal or state, in the United States. So I hope that's helpful, Eugene.
Thank you, David. Just want to point out that Tom Getman, who is the lead sponsor of the second resolution we discussed tonight, has posted his email in the chat if you would like to reach out to Tom and talk more with him. Thank you, Tom. And I see Cheryl is supporting the comment made earlier about understanding, supporting the comment about understanding if we're talking about boycotts alone or BDS. So thank you, Cheryl, for that. Michelle, I see you had a comment. Anything further you would like to say?
Sorry, I'm a talker. Hi. I just want to say this, that, you know, is it the chicken and the egg, the cart before the horse? I don't know, but coming to St. Mark's has opened up doors for me about the world I want to see. And the majority of that work has been about gun violence prevention. The other piece is that I have some deeply committed people who want to try and break into this idea of Christian nationalism, Christian Zionism, the plight of the Palestinian people, the lack of humanity that the Israelis are, they're losing their humanity by being an oppressor. And can we fix any of that? I don't know. But the conversation has helped me move to want to know more. And if I was just told, hey, this is really something that's important and you should study it, that's one thing. I think it was Jessica earlier was saying like, hey man, you guys passed this. I'm going to have to talk to my neighbor about this and I got to hit the ground running. I don't mean to force any of you into this issue, but I do think it is a piece about being called. And story time by Michelle, and I'll try and be very quick. My mother was a Haida Indian. And at age 5, she was taken from her home and put in a residential school. And that happened because the Anglican Church of Canada did not see her as a person. What's happening in these situations is people are not being seen as a person. And as incarnational people and as Easter people, we have to see each other. And that's the drive. So I think that I hear you, Jim, and it's really complicated. And the world, there's no easy answers to any of this. What I love about this church is that we're willing to struggle with it. And what I love about this diocese is that I feel like tonight was a real fair hearing around some really complicated issues. So I want to thank you all. And I want to thank EDAO for making that possible. And I think story time by Michelle is over. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Michelle. I think that your point is really well taken. And part of the thrust behind the resolution I would like the convention to consider is I just want to have the conversation. You know, I would really like to have that conversation on the floor of General Convention. And so I think that's because I think you're absolutely right. It's having the conversation is important, whether or not an action actually ultimately comes from it. But so many of these anti-BDS laws are aimed at not even having the conversation in the first place. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you both. And thank you to Mary for posting her email in the chat. She'd be happy to have further conversations as well. Just looking at our time, we are coming toward the end, but I don't want to cut this short. So please, if you have any final questions or comments, please share those in the chat. Thank you, Emma. Emma looks like she did some research through General Convention archives. So not seeing any questions or comments. David, I'm just going to turn back to you if you have any sort of final words to share based upon what you heard from everyone.
Just that I really appreciate the conversation and people's willingness to engage this. I particularly appreciated Jim's and Michelle's comments reminding us that we really are called as Episcopalians and as Christians to respect the dignity of every human being and to actually see people and not objectify them. I also really appreciate Anne's comment about the specificity of language, because I also think that's really important. And so thanks, Anne. I'm sure I'll be having a conversation with the resolutions committee about that. But this, and then I finally would like to just echo what Michelle said. I think this forum has been really helpful as a setup for convention. So thank you for that.
Thank you, David. Thanks to all of our sponsors, and thank you all for being here tonight. This concludes our first resolution hearing, but as a reminder, we will have another hearing next Tuesday, January 18th. We will start again at 6 p.m. to discuss the remaining 3 resolutions that have been put forward for consideration at a convention. And those are a resolution on Christchurch Akakik separation, a resolution to include the name of Bishop Barbara Harris in lesser feasts and fasts, and a resolution on the creation of a task force on Black ministries here in the Diocese of Washington. The text of those resolutions and explanations can be found on the convention page of the diocesan website. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday when we discuss those resolutions.